Hello, everyone, and welcome to another PropTech Ramble. Today, I am joined by Simon Gosling, the CMO of QuietMark. Simon, you have quite a long and varied bio. I was going to try and read the whole lot, but that would probably take up most of the podcast because you have done a hell of a lot of stuff. So
it is a 30-year career, so don't worry.
So the QuietMark is an independent global certification associated with the UK Noise Ambient Abatement Society, I should say, the charitable foundation. So you use a lot of scientific testing in the work that you guys do, but you were appointed in 2021. You were appointed the Home and Sound Advisories of Well also.
That's right. I was
also. You've done a lot around masterclasses in VFX and tech trends and a whole heap of other stuff. So welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being on.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me to do this. It's a pleasure to be taking part.
So rather than me do it really badly, just want to give everyone kind of a bit of background on who you are and what you do.
Okay, well, as you eloquently put, I'm Simon Gosling, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at QuietMark, and I'm also normally sat where you are. I'm the host of the QuietMark podcast, so it's interesting to be answering the questions today rather than asking them. But as you're quite right, so QuietMark, I'm their Chief Marketing Officer, so I sort of help with their storytelling strategy, if you like. We're on a mission to improve well-being and health through improved acoustics and reduced noise. And so essentially when people say, well, what is QuietMark? I kind of make it easy by saying we make it easier for consumers and trade buyers in commercial buildings to find the quietest products. And when I say quietest products, there's two ways to look at that. There's things that produce a noise, a kettle, a washing machine. So we only certify the quietest 10 to 20% of any product. And you'll see it in John Lewis, in Argos, in Varies, in Currys. When you see that purple Q, you know it's been scientifically tested, and you know it's in the quietest on the market. The other thing we also certify is the things that improve acoustics, things that don't make a sound, but that could be windows, floors, doors, ceilings. They don't make a sound, but they can improve the sound. So we look at the sound tests of those products, and we verify that data as a third-party certification, and then QuietMark certifies building products because we're, like I say, wanting just to make it easier. When people see the Q, they know it's been tested, and they know it's going to help improve acoustic comfort.
Nice. Well, the NutriBullet in the kitchen definitely doesn't have a Q on it, but we don't have one of those anymore. We've changed. I won't do any plugs for what we've got now, but it's bloody good and it's much quieter.
But I will say to you actually on that NutriBullet thing, quiet is an interesting thing. We don't just certify decibels, Michael. We also certify tonalities because a NutriBullet or a food processor or a blender, they have to make a noise to chop up food. There's no such thing as a silent product. But you can have two. You can have two which produce similar decibels, but one can scream and the other one can hum. The screamer isn't going to get the QuietMark, whereas the hum, because of the way it's being, tonalities, frequencies, these are other things we take into consideration.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense because the one that we have bought since, we've ditched the NutriBullet because it started to die anyway, but it's a much bigger machine and it can blend much denser things as well, and it doesn't care about frozen stuff. But it does obviously make a noise because it's a blender, but it is so much quieter and the tone is completely different. So it's really interesting. And so with someone who has tinnitus, which I do, the NutriBullet, after it had been run, my ears would ring. This thing I can stand beside it all day long. Because when I used to turn the NutriBullet on, I used to put my fingers in my ears and then quickly take them out and turn it off and unscrew it so I could get it out. Because the tone difference for me was it's really big. Most people probably wouldn't notice it, but my tinnitus is,
I have a bit of tinnitus, and we also know that the Autistic Society, they say that people with autism are somewhat attracted to products which make more pleasant sounds and certainly hate products which scream at them. So it helps people in all spectrums of life.
Yeah, cool. It's something that I'm very interested in this because of my tinnitus and different. But people who don't have it don't necessarily understand what can really affect it or make it worse very quickly like that. Unfortunately, NutriBullet people, your product was one of them, but we'll move on. Otherwise, I won't get through the questions. We've got some questions here. So, how did you get into the field of acoustics, and have you seen how has it changed since you started in the field? You mentioned a 30-year career, but how did you get into it, and how has it changed?
Well, I would say I got into the field of acoustics earlier than even 30 years ago, because I'm 53 now, but as an 11-year-old boy, I was a singer in a choir. And I remember being in a church, a beautiful old church in Kings Langley where I lived, and recognizing that when we sang together, the effect of the building on the way we sang was just so beautiful, the reverberation, the echo, but it just meant you sang better because it sounded great. In fact, just quickly on that note, I mean, I know an organist called Wade Bray, who's an acoustician. He plays organs all over the world. He likes those big sort of organs that you see in cinemas in the old days. He loves them. And he said that there was a piece of music once that he was trying to play but couldn't quite play it. And then one day he sat at an organ in the right space, and the playing of that song just came out of him because the blend of the musician, the musical instrument, the sound of the instrument, and the room just made it happen. And then when he went home and tried to play it again, thinking, I could do it now, he couldn't play it again because the acoustics was so important. And so as a choir boy, as a drummer in bands, as someone who's a record buyer who loves the Royal Albert Hall, the Festival Hall, the Brixton Academy, I've always sort of, when I've gone to see bands, as much as enjoying what I'm watching, also enjoyed how they sound in that space. And you go to certain venues because they sound good. So it was always there, even though I was working in visual effects. As a musician and a drummer, I appreciated acoustics. Fast forward to about 2016, and I built the home of the future for a company called Unruly, which was the home of 2020. In 2016, and it was asking questions about how will data transform the way that brands can have conversations with consumers in their connected home, the advent of the connected home. In that experiment, I interviewed tons of people about what will the home of the future be like, and I talked to biophilic designers about plants in the homes. One of the people I interviewed for that experiment was Poppy Skeeler, who's the founder of the Quartmark Society, the Quartmark Approval Limited. I met Poppy and asked her what the sound of the future was going to be. She spoke very much not just about loud noises, but also about the fact that we were going to. She predicted we're going to be spending a lot more time on Zoom calls in the future. I don't think she knew a pandemic was coming, but she could see this technology was taking off. And so she talks about the beeps and squeaks, that notification sounds. Also, even though they're quite quiet, they can be quite irritating. So anyway, I met Poppy on that experiment, and we developed a great collaboration on that project. We also developed a lovely, genuine friendship. She's a very good friend of mine. And then when that project came to an end, I thought, right, I know who I'm going to call for my next job. So I called Poppy, and she said, we'd love to have you on board. We're expanding and we're developing new areas. So I joined Quartmark, and then I became very much involved with the work that they're doing their storytelling as a marketing person. Then we launched a platform, which was certified building products, like I said earlier, walls, floors, doors, ceilings. Yes. And the point we launched that in February 2020, and I was about to take that on the road to architectural practices and say, we now have this platform called Acoustics Academy, use it. But of course, I couldn't go out to the architectural practices to tell them about this platform, because the pandemic locked us down. So we started a podcast where I interviewed acousticians in the built environment. Leading acousticians who'd worked on some of the biggest, most famous, like Coal Drops Yards, the Shard, the Louvre Museum, amazing acousticians whose job it was to make sure that places sounded great. And I thought this is really good. We know a lot about visual design when we see a space. We often talk about the visuals, but we often we take for granted if a place sounds right, but you certainly know when it sounds wrong because it doesn't feel right.
Yes.
And so through this podcast, like I say, which is now 42 episodes, I've spoken to tons of amazing acousticians. It's been a real privilege, and it's really sort of elevated my understanding and appreciation of what it takes to acoustically improve a space and the impact it has on the occupants of that space.
Cool. And it's interesting because years ago, people wouldn't have thought about this in any way, shape or form, but we work a lot with Accenture, and their UK office, which is just down the road from us here, Fenchurch Street, they've put a lot of effort and research into acoustics, and you can tell by walking around the floors. It's even when I'm in there, a very loud Australian, my voice doesn't carry and it doesn't reverberate through the floor. It's very cool. You talk and then it's gone. They've got quiet areas, but then they've got a cafe where they don't have any of that on because they want the vibe of people and they want the noise and all that sort of thing. So it's quite cool. And then in New York, they've got 9 floors, and each floor has a different look and feel, but they've put a lot of time and effort into the acoustics and how it should sound and reducing echo and reducing noise. And they've got different meeting rooms. They've got the telephone booths. They've got bigger, small, medium, and large meeting rooms, but the acoustics, even when you're in the kitchen areas, they've designed the acoustics in the kitchen to make it a little bit more vibrant when you're in a kitchen, because you want that
brilliant
water cooler talk, and then you're at the desk, you want concentration, so the noise dampening is big. I never thought about it so much until the last few years, coming back to an office and then working with people like Accenture, and they do it for themselves and they do it for other people. It does really make a difference of how you physically feel in a space.
It really does. In fact, it's so associated with feeling. It's funny because if you say to someone, describe a building that you went to, they'll often lead with the visual description. They say, oh, it had beautiful walls and it had lovely stained glass windows, or whatever it might be. They immediately go for the colours and the visual. But if you say to someone, how did it sound when you went there? They'll go, but then if you say to them, how did you feel when you went there? They go, oh, I just felt so comfortable, like you just described Accenture, which sounds like they've orchestrated their soundscape, and that's how we describe it. And so, like I say, when people say, how did you feel? And they go, oh, I felt so comfortable when I was in there. It's sound that's really integral to that well-being feeling.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And that comes on to one of the other questions, actually. How can noise impact employees, and does this filter back to employers?
Massively is the answer to that question. So the British Journal of Psychology did a paper a few years ago, and they said that background noise can make us 66% less productive. It really can stop you from being able to get on with a task. Oh. So by that token, if you're 66% less productive, 2/3 less productive, your day by mathematics becomes potentially 2/3 longer to get the same amount done. And if that's the case, you're working later. You might get stressed because you're getting home later. The stress might cause you to sleep not as well because you're thinking about the tasks that you had difficulty completing. Yep. And then you don't sleep well. You go to work the next day and you're feeling tired. And it can be this really bad loop. And it's the sound that, in fact, impacts the employees. And in fact, one of the things on that subject that's really key right now, obviously we all know about the Great Resignation. And back in May, this year, there was a piece in the BBC News that says that almost 1 in 5 UK workers say that they're likely to change jobs in the next 12 months as they seek better pay and job satisfaction, as a survey by PricewaterhouseCoopers suggested. And it also said that it found that younger, highly skilled workers were most likely to be unhappy in their jobs or seeking a raise. 60% of them said they'd prefer to work fully or mostly from home. And there's this index, which is called the Leesman Index, which has found that 71% of employees say that noise is important to them, but only 33% of them are happy. And Leesman is this sort of benchmark. It's so it's this employee database, which has interviewed 1 million employees in 107 countries. And cutting to the chase, they say, what's the difference between a place that works well and a place that doesn't work well? And the bottom line they say on their website is it's acoustics. If you prepare good acoustics, you talked about the Accenture place. It's, gone are the days and now of this sort of open plan offices where you're elbow to elbow at terminals where you've just got someone on the phone next to you. People don't want to go from home back to that. They don't, or a space where people are talking on Zoom calls and everyone's just wearing headphones. You want different zones. And so, it's, and there's also, it's really causing people to not want to go back to the office. And what does make them to stay in the office is when a place sounds good. Because like I said, it's about how you feel.
Yeah, it really is. And that's why no one sits next to me, because I'm a loud Australian. On that, how do acoustics relate to wellness? The productivity you just mentioned there is one of the big ones, right? And that is key, because you don't want it to be loud. Concentration is key. So how does acoustics relate to wellness on that front? From what you've just said about acoustics and productivity, that's number one.
Sure.
But what are the other bits wrapped around it?
Okay, well, there's many elements of wellness. In fact, at the head of the show, you mentioned that last year I was appointed to the Homes and Sound Advisory Boards of the Well Building Institute. And anyone who's familiar with Well will know that just as QuietMark is a certification, when you see that purple Q, you know it's a quiet product. The Well certificate, you can see it on a building. When you see the Well certification on a building, or if it achieves that certification, you know that it has been designed and refurbished and renovated to achieve the Well standard. And there are 10 concepts that make up the Well standard. So when the people from Well go over to verify the space or certify the place. They go around with their clipboards checking all sorts of things, but they're checking light quality, air quality, thermal quality, water quality, and sound quality is one of the 10 concepts. And we know in any space, I've worked in places in my past which were like a car park where it was sweltering hot in the summer, freezing in the winter. There was a flickering neon light bulb above me, and it just wasn't conducive to productive work. And what Accenture has done, I don't know if that particular building has achieved well standard, but it certainly sounds like they've taken that into consideration. But once you get those elements, we all know any space, if you've ever worked in a nasty space, then you work in a space where it's been really decorated and prepared for the well-being of the staff, you know where you work better, you know where you feel happier. And as I say, sound is one of those concepts in but it's also it's because it's invisible, sound gets overlooked. People will spend ages at a table looking at colour swatches and materials. What sort of countertops are we going to have? What sort of colours are we going to have on the wall? But they often don't ask themselves, how do we want this place to sound? But I think that post-pandemic, sound has moved up the priority level. We used to go very much for the Pinterest visual boards when we were designing any space, and that was natural. But I think that what happened in the pandemic is that sound, because of the three biggest causes of noise by mankind are air traffic, road traffic, and construction. And those three things stopped mostly under lockdown. And when they stopped, seismometers across the world, which measure sound, showed that there was a wave of silence spread across the planet, which reduced noise in the planet by 50% all over the world. You can see a chart on YouTube showing the needles drop. People then said, and it happened, I don't know if you remember the lockdown's weather in London, if you were here, but it was the glorious summer. Birds were singing. You could hear the wind in the trees. You could hear waves in the sea if you lived near the ocean. And suddenly, a connection with nature became an antidote to our fears at this really uncertain time. And effectively, I love the film Spinal Tap with the amplifier going up to 11, but once upon a time, the needle was up to 10. And the pandemic made the needle go down to 5. And what we ask at QuietMark is, does it have to go back to 10 again? And what we're finding is that when people are designing products and spaces where sound used to be a bit of an afterthought, it's shoulder to shoulder with visuals more so these days.
I didn't know about that during the pandemic. I'm going to have to go and look that up because it did.
I'll send you a link.
Please do. But I imagine it was a huge difference. Huge difference. I mean, there was still some construction. I have a wife and 3 kids, a cat and a dog and 2 cats. So I came into the office every day during lockdown. But London was deathly quiet. I mean, it was phenomenal. Sometimes I was the only person on London Bridge. It was very quiet.
But you know something, just on that, you use the phrase there, deathly quiet. And sometimes what you're trying to achieve as well isn't silence, because silence can actually be quite scary. And so at QuietMark, when we say orchestrate your soundscape or improve sound quality, the goal isn't dead silence, because actually, no one can hear you scream in space, is the old alien line. No one really wants that. You kind of want ambient sound. You want to be able to hear kids playing in the playground across the road or whatever it might be. You want, or birdsong for certainly, but you just want to be able to control those levels with good glazing or good flooring or whatever it might be.
That's
silence
very true.
Isn't the goal.
No, very true. I don't really shut up, so you don't ever get much silence from me. But how can employers or landlords make their spaces quieter or their offices quieter?
Good question.
What's the easiest thing? Because you could go from one extreme to the other. But what are some of the basics that people can do rather than having to completely retrofit a whole building or a floor or multiple floors? How can you do something quite easily to have an effect?
Well, we call it well-being-led design. Okay, and one of the guests on our podcast is a guy called Adam Cossey, who's a partner at Hawkins Brown, who are the 7th biggest architectural practice in the UK. So he knows what he's talking about. They did some tests, and they found that before the pandemic, you needed 6 desks per 10 people in an office. But what they found post-pandemic with hybrid working models is that we've gone from 6 desks for 10 to 3 desks for 10. So you can take 3 desks per 10 people out of the office now, which gives you a lot more room. So you don't need open plan rows of desks shoulder to shoulder. You need to create spaces. And the Accenture example you gave was great because you said that there are some so we certify various products that enable it. So if I talk to you about VetraSpace, they make meeting rooms which have glass doors which you can shut, and they could be from a single person phone booth to an 8-person, 12-person meeting room. You can have meeting pods by Blocko, which are these sort of acoustic pods that you can sit in. They're quite open, but they've got a table in them. But you can work and you can block out some of the background noise. And I think the thing about any workspace is you want the sandpit, the collaboration space. Otherwise, we could all work from home. There are certain tasks that you want to go into the office and be face to face and get into that sandpit. And that's going to be quite a loud area. And it should be, because it generates the ideas and the energy. But then you also want to go away and do your PowerPoint build or your thing that you want to do on your own, focused. And so what you should do with the space that you've saved by not having so many desks is create plant areas, like areas for biophilia. Plants can be a great absorber of sound, but you also want to create booths, pods, meeting spaces, open plan areas, and mix it up so that someone with their laptop isn't sitting there at their desk thinking, I can't work here. They think, I'll go over here and I'll be able to work really well. And you can do that with a variety of products, and we certify them. And it's not just booths and pods, because that's objects. You can also put in different types of flooring. So if you've got wooden flooring, you can get something called LVT, luxury vinyl tiling, right? Which tile flooring, which is, it looks like real wood, or it looks like real stone. You wouldn't know it. I've got it in the room behind me, as you can see here. That looks like wood. You wouldn't know. But the impact noise on it and the noise that transfers to the floor below is reduced by up to 21 decibels, which is really significant because it's been designed to be an acoustic flooring. So you can put acoustic plaster systems on your ceiling, which increase speech privacy by companies like Rockfon or Baswa or Armorcoat. These ceilings absorb sound much more than just a flat plaster ceiling, which bounces sound around. And you can install furniture. So there's a company called Buzzy Space that do acoustic furniture, acoustic lighting, and more felt, more absorbent sponge in them, but really beautifully designed. And the more you put in all these acoustic things like the walls, the floors, the furniture, and you reduce the sound of things. So if you've got a kitchen in the office, which I used to work in a space where the kitchen was right by my desk, and if you put in QuietMart certified kettles like Julep, the classic is a very quiet, whisper quiet kettle, for example, or quiet coffee machines by Melita. If you choose quieter things, quieter fridges, things that emit sound and more sound absorptive materials, and take less desks and make it more zonal, you're onto a winner.
Perfect. And you could again, with that, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater and do a whole new floor. You could start to do that piece by piece, right? So
absolutely. I mean, even the most basic thing, putting a rug on the floor in certain areas might help. Whatever you can do to absorb sound, and obviously professional acousticians should go in if you want to do a real overhaul. But just that sort of off-the-shelf solution that you're talking about. I mean, we've got pages on our Acoustics Academy where you can go to Office and see what sort of products you can get. But generally speaking, yes, there's a whole variety of things you can do. It just takes a little bit of thought, and it will make a massive difference.
Cool. Well, Simon, that is the last one, but we always have our quick fire round of questions, so I'm going to get these off to you, and then I need to jump. But I really do appreciate the time, and with someone with tinnitus, sound does make a big difference for me. So it's been really good having you on. So I'm going to fire the questions at you. So what was your first ever job?
My first ever job was as a receptionist at Molyneux, who were just off Carnaby Street. They're a post-production company who still get credits on TV shows, and that enabled me to be the post-production supervisor on the wonderful Father Ted, amongst many other things. So yeah, that was my first ever job.
Oh, cool. Very cool. It's much cooler than my first job. When and where are you most productive?
In the room that I'm sitting in now, I think. My children are now older, so my eldest daughter's moved out, and I've acquired a really nice sized bedroom, which I'm sitting in now. Painted a very calming green. It's full of plants. It's got nice furnishings. It's got teak furniture from the 1950s. I feel like Don Draper gone wrong, sort of thing. But it's very calm. I've got bay. I'm very lucky. I've got bay windows, so light. The thermal quality is really good. The light quality, the sound is very good, and I'm very productive in this space. Thank you.
Nice. And what's your favourite book?
I think my favourite book is Murakami's IQ84 by Haruki Murakami. He's one of my favourite authors. Drive My Car was a great film last year, which is based on one of his novels. But that is a wonderful book worth checking out.
What about when you're not working? How do you spend your time? I imagine it's doing something in the audio world, is it?
All sorts of things. No, I'm really into nature. So I think, again, with the reconnection to nature through sound, I'm a massive bike rider, dog walker, gardener, and art gallery visitor, and cinema and film and all of that. But I think really what I'm trying to do now, because we do work from home, is I like to be outside, and I love planting plants in my garden, walking my dog to the local nursery, bringing some plants back, and being very hippie and green.
I'm learning to be green in the green thumb or green fingered in the garden. My wife got us an allotment, so I'm actually doing more of that than I've ever done, because we don't have any plants in our backyard. It's grass, a big shed full of bikes, and there's grass, and then there's patches that the dogs dug up, but that's about it. So so I am doing it. We are growing courgettes, raspberries, strawberries, lettuce, carrots, and a whole heap of other stuff. So not plants per se, but fruit and veg.
It's funny, hasn't the pandemic led to a lot of people becoming more like the good life? I don't know if you remember.
Yes, I remember it very well.
Tom and Barbara Good. Yeah. It's the new rock and roll.
Only took us 5 years to get in a lot, and our name's been down for a long time, so we're living it up now. What's the favourite office you've ever worked in?
Well, apart from this home office, I think when I worked, gosh, that's a really, really good question, actually. I think when I worked at the moving picture company, and funnily enough, that was an open plan, loud office, but I wasn't 53, I was 33, and it was a different time, and I really enjoyed working at the moving picture company, but I wouldn't want to go there again today, to be honest with you, because I would find it too loud and off-putting. But at that time, that was the energy, that was the vibe. I was in Soho, I was going to see bands, and it was rock and roll, and It's kind of what I wanted at that time. Different time in my life.
Yeah, same. I have to say, mine. I probably couldn't have picked one. The same. When I was young, I worked at a company called Level 3, and it was very, very loud and very vibrant. But we were all delivering data centers all over the world under budget and on time. And by doing that, they're allowing us to pretty much do whatever we want. So we had lots of parties. But I would say now mine is the Accenture office in New York. I don't think I've been to a better one yet. Although they're doing it at Fenchurch Street, they're doing well. So there could be some competition, but we'll see how it goes. And knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self?
I think to my younger self, carry on drumming, but do some gardening.
Perfect. Simon, thank you very much for being on. It's been a pleasure to meet you. And I hopefully people on listening to this, or when they do listen to this, obviously it's not live, but there's a lot to be listened to about sound.
Indeed there is, and it's been a pleasure chatting to you about it. So thank you for inviting me to your show.
Pleasure. Lovely. Thank you very much, Simon. For those listening, thank you very much.